10 Creepy Unsolved Mysteries from Texas, U.S. There is something about unexplained mysteries that compels attention. The number of unsolved crimes in Texas is higher than in most states, due both to the sheer size of the Lone Star State and also to the amount of empty, desolate space where crimes can be committed with no chance of being discovered. Even as cities like Houston, Dallas, and Austin grow their populations into the millions, there are still areas near each urban center where it is possible to be entirely off the grid. That is why this creepy Texas list features crimes from the past, but also from the modern day. With improvements in evidence collecting, DNA testing, and all the other modern tools used by law enforcement, you would imagine that some of these cold cases will eventually be solved. For now, though, this list takes you through some of the most bizarre, most brutal, and most shocking crimes that ever took place in the great state of Texas. 1. The Servant Girl Murders, Austin, Texas, 1885. A serial killer, popularly known as the Servant Girl Annihilator, worked the city of Austin between 1884 and 1885. The series of murders was referred to by contemporary sources as the Servant Girl Murders. The December 26, 1885 issue of the New York Times reported that the murders were committed by some cunning madman, who is insane on the subject of killing women. There were 8 known victims of the Servant Girl Annihilator, all murdered with an axe. In most cases, the murderer would enter women's homes, knock them unconscious, drag them outside, and murder them outdoors. The Annihilator was never identified, though some think he may have been Jack the Ripper on a trip to the U.S. The term itself was, perhaps unsurprisingly, coined by a writer, William Sidney Porter, more commonly known as noted author O. Henry Porter, who was living in Austin at the time of the murders, wrote in a letter to his friend Dave Hall dated May 10, 1885, "Town is fearfully dull, except for the frequent raids of the Servant Girl Annihilators, who make things lively in the dull hours of the night." Although no contemporary newspaper articles referred to the murders by the name the Servant Girl Annihilator, Porter's morbidly perfect phrase stuck after the letter containing it was published in his weekly, The Rolling Stone. The Annihilator's spree began on December 30, 1884 with Molly Smith, a 25-year-old black cook who was found on the ground, next to the outhouse behind her employer's home. Eliza Shelley, another cook, had her head nearly hacked in two by an axe on the evening of May 6, 1885. 3 weeks later on May 22, another servant, Irene Cross, was found having been stabbed a number of times by a knife. A reporter on the scene said it also looked like she had been scalped. Mary Ramey, the 11-year-old daughter of a servant, was dragged to a wash house, stabbed through the ear, and raped on August 30th. Her mother, Rebecca, had been knocked unconscious while she slept, ensuring the perpetrator wouldn't be interrupted. Gracie Vance and her boyfriend, Orange Washington, met their ends on the night of September 28. Their bodies were found behind Gracie's employer's house, Washington having been hit in the skull with an axe and Vance with her head beaten so severely it was described as almost a jelly. Finally, Christmas Eve that year saw not one, but 2 murders, and unlike all of the previous killings, they were of wealthy, white women. First, Sue Hancock was found by her husband in their backyard with her split open by an axe and a sharp, thin object lodged in her brain. An hour later, Eula Phillips was found naked in an unlit alley behind her father-in-law's home, in the most well-to-do neighborhood in Austin. Timber placed across her arms pinned her down, her skull had been smashed by an axe, and she had been raped. And then, the murders just stopped. No one knows why. Some credit the increase in police presence, with more officers posted around town and tasked with finding out everything they could about any newcomers. Others say it was the creation of a citizens' vigilance committee and the promise of rewards for capture that scared the perpetrator straight. Some even claim it was the construction of the moon towers that keep the city lit at night, although those weren't built until 10 years after the fact. It's presumed that the killer left the city, but we don't know for sure. What we do know is that of the 400-odd men that were arrested that year in connection with the murders, none were successfully tried for the crimes. How do we know these unfortunate souls all fell victim to the same killer? Certain commonalities link them together. All of them, for example, were attacked indoors while asleep in their beds. 5 of them were then dragged outside and killed. 3 of them were mutilated once they had been taken outside. 6 had had some sort of short object driven into their heads through their ears. And all of them were posed in a similar manner. These threads draw enough of a connection between them that we're fairly certain they were perpetrated by the same person. Although we still have yet to discover exactly who that person might be. No supposedly eyewitness accounts even agree on what the suspect looked like. Some reported him to be white, others described him as dark, and still others called him yellow. He wore a Mother Hubbard dress, or he wore a slouch hat, he wore a rag that covered his face, or he didn't. He worked alone, or with a partner, or even as part of a gang. He was magical, supernatural, invisible. Or he didn't exist at all. What happened to him? Why has he been forgotten by all but the most dedicated of Austin historians? Perhaps it's because he later overshadowed himself with a different name and greater crimes. One of the more popular theories posits that the servant girl annihilator hopped a ship and crossed the Atlantic, only to resurface in London 3 years later, gaining the name of Jack the Ripper in the process. But conclusive evidence for this theory has yet to be found. The cases have gone cold and to this day, remain unsolved. They've left their mark on Austin, though. The moon towers are a testament to it. 2. Orange socks. On October 31, 1979, a white female wearing only orange socks was found in a culvert alongside Interstate 35 near Georgetown. The woman had been sexually assaulted, strangled to death, and then thrown from an overpass. The woman has never been identified. And though convicted serial killer Henry Lee Lucas confessed to the crime, his confession was recanted. Lucas confessed to upwards of 3,000 murders, so his admission had always been in doubt. The Orange Socks case is still unsolved. The Texas Department of Public Safety is once again asking the public for help to identify the woman, whose slaying landed the notorious Henry Lee Lucas on death row. Someone somewhere knows who this young woman was, said Heidi Fisher, Program Supervisor for the Department of Public Safety's Missing Persons Clearinghouse. We want to find out who she is and be able to finally give her a real name, not a nickname. We want to know who her family is, and we want her family to know what happened to her, Fisher said. Lucas, who once confessed to 600 murders nationwide but later recanted them all, was convicted in 1984 of strangling orange socks, so named by investigators because that was the only clothing she wore when she was found. Lucas confessed 4 times. Her body was dumped near Georgetown, about 35 miles north of Austin in Williamson County, on Halloween 1979. No witnesses or physical evidence linked Lucas to the crime, but he confessed 4 times. A jury in San Angelo convicted him and sentenced him to die. Although he had 8 other murder convictions in Texas and 1 in West Virginia, only the Orange Socks case produced a death sentence. Doubts were later raised about Lucas' confession after news reports, and an attorney general's investigation indicated he might have been in Florida at the time she was killed. Then Governor George W. Bush commuted Lucas' sentence to life in prison in 1998. Lucas died in prison in 2001. Texas officials are again releasing a 1990 drawing of orange socks along with a detailed drawing of an elongated, oval-shaped ring-made of abalone shell and silver that she was wearing. A vague description. There are few details to provide about orange socks. She was white, in her mid-20s, 5 feet 9 inches tall and weighed 135 to 140 pounds. She had brown hair with a reddish tint, hazel eyes and pierced ears. Her teeth were in good condition with no evidence of dental work. Lucas gave what he thought her name was in his signed confession in 1983. I think her name was Joni or Judy, I don't remember exactly, he wrote. Tricia Blake, a researcher at the Missing Persons Clearinghouse, said investigators don't put much stock in that given Lucas' track record of potentially misleading statements. He confessed to all kinds of things. When we do have a lead that comes in and the name pops up, the hackles go up a bit, but we're certainly not limiting it to a name, she said. Leads haven't panned out. Investigators have put out the call for information twice before, in 1998 before Lucas' pending execution and again in 2001. The Orange Socks case was profiled twice on the America's Most Wanted television program, and hundreds of leads came in from around the country. The most promising was a call last year from California. A woman and her brother-in-law saw the drawing of orange socks on the internet. The woman told Texas authorities her sister had been missing since traveling to Texas in the late 70s with an abusive boyfriend. Investigators got excited when a picture of the missing woman looked like orange socks, but DNA analysis proved it wasn't her. Orange socks remains buried in a grave marked unidentified woman in Georgetown, and Blake said the case will remain open until she is identified. Every lead will be investigated. 3. Murder of Meghan Curl. Who was the person who had that much anger and passion for my daughter? That question will forever haunt Sherry McClung, the mother of murdered Lufkin woman Meghan Romero Curl. 13 years ago, Curl's body was found tied to the bedpost of her burning Fox Run apartment. In the early morning hours of March 26, 2000, Curl's killer reportedly slit her throat twice, and placed a plastic bag over her head before setting fire to her bed. Just one of the things they did would have killed her. They didn't have to do 3 or 4, her mother said. How can somebody hold that inside of them for that long, and not have told someone and felt any inkling of remorse? I don't understand that. Earlier that night, the 26-year-old had reportedly gone out dancing at Electric Cowboy as she often did. According to a previous interview, Lufkin Police Lieutenant David Young gave the television show Unsolved Mysteries, when they profiled Curl's case, she had been seen talking to an unknown man at the club hours before her death. That man did buy her 1 or 2 drinks. No one at the club knew who this man was, and no one reported ever seeing him there before or since, Young said in that interview. She went to another club, called the Sports Shack, just a little ways down the road from the Electric Cowboy Club. She talked to some people there and caught a ride with an employee of the Sports Shack home. Curl reportedly arrived home around 1:30 a.m. and a neighbor had a brief conversation with Curl outside their apartment building just before an unknown man pulled up in a car. Upon seeing the vehicle, Curl told her neighbor that she thought it was the man she had met at the club. In an interview Curl's neighbor later gave Unsolved Mysteries, she recalled knocking on Curl's apartment door nearly an hour later just to make sure everything was alright. She said, "I was right. It was my friend from the club. And I looked down to him, and he just nodded his head slowly and didn't say a word," the neighbor said in the interview. "And I didn't speak to him at all, either. I said, 'Well, are you sure you're okay?' And she said, 'Yes, I'm fine.' That would be the last time anyone except Curl's killer would see her alive." By 4 a.m., emergency officials were called to her apartment on a report of smoke coming from her building. Within the hour the fire had been extinguished and her burned body was discovered, remnants of her charred nightgown still visible. In interviewing men from her past, we learned that her normal sleeping attire would be something along the lines of shorts and a t-shirt. But if she were going to be romantically involved, she would sometimes wear a negligee or a nightgown, Young told Unsolved Mysteries. "We feel, because of that, she knew this person and was preparing for an intimate evening with him." Curl's neighbor would later describe the man she had seen in Curl's apartment as a white male with blonde hair, light mustache and gold-rimmed glasses. Despite investigators' best efforts, the man, who is considered the prime suspect in her death, was never located. Though most would wish for justice, Curl's mother said all she wants is the truth. "I don't want a court hearing. I don't want to put anybody in prison. I just want someone to tell me what happened," McClung said of her daughter, who would have turned 40 October 1st. "I guess I'll find out when I meet Jesus, but I won't have to worry about it anyway because I'll be with Meghan." 4. Lovers Lane Murders. There's nothing quite like a good, old-fashioned murder mystery, and when it comes to creepy cold cases, Houston has plenty of them to choose from. From the notorious I-45 killing fields to the grisly, gut-churning icebox murders, the Bayou City has been home to some seriously disturbing, and unsolved, murder mysteries. But even with the vaults full of cold case files, there are 5 open murder cases, which span decades of Houston history, that we just can't seem to shake from our memories. These are Houston's 5 most unsettling, and unsolved, murder mysteries. Time to sleep with the lights on, folks. Lovers Lane Murders. The 1990 The Lovers Lane murder case is one of the most notorious unsolved homicides in Houston's history, and for good reason. On August 23, 1990, 22-year-old Cheryl Henry and her 21-year-old boyfriend, Andy Atkinson, headed out for the night and didn't return. They were found brutally murdered the next day in an undeveloped, wooded area in West Houston, that had been dubbed Lover's Lane for its reputation as a makeout spot. The couple was not found in their car, but in the woods nearby. Cheryl has been raped and then killed. Her throat was slashed, and the killer had covered her naked body up with boards. Andy was found tied to a tree, his throat also slashed. Reports say he was nearly decapitated. At the crime scene, police say they found a golf club lying in a field, along with 3 golf balls, one lined up after the other. They pointed the way to Cheryl's body. There were also 4 partially deflated balloons found tied to the tree above Cheryl's body, and a crisp $20 bill was lying next to her. According to Gary Atkinson, Andy's father, investigators told him that they believe Andy let the killer tie him to a tree. They also know that Cheryl was killed first, which means Andy was forced to listen to her scream, but was unable to help. There has been some progress on the case in recent years. The Harris County Sheriff's Department says it has linked the grisly murders to another unsolved rape and burglary that was committed months before the Lover's Lane murders, but the case remains unsolved. 5. The mystery of the Texas killing fields. Over the past 40 years, one desolate strip of land in South Texas has become synonymous with the disappearance and murder of young women and girls. This area has a mysterious and terrifying history, and once you ask what are the Texas killing fields, you will immediately wish that you didn't know the answer. The bone-chilling name given to this rugged 25-mile piece of land bordering the Calder oil field and Leak City is something out of a real-life horror story. 4 bodies have been found within its limits, about a mile from the I-45. The Texas killing fields are part of a 50-mile stretch that runs along Interstate 45, between Houston and the island city of Galveston, Texas, dubbed the Highway to Hell. There have been 30 bodies found in this haunted place since the early 70s. The remote rugged wasteland that lies between deserted oil fields and the interstate has been described as the ideal dumping ground for a serial killer. There is little chance that a victim could escape their attacker or that their screams could even be heard. It's a kind of environment that's sultry and sinister, easy to get to. You jump off of I-45. You drive down one of the dirt-rutted roads. You dump the body. And you're gone for good, Texas Monthly reporter Skip Hollingsworth told CBS in an interview. The murders began in June 1971, when 13-year-old Colette Wilson went missing after getting off at a bus stop after school. She was found in the killing field some 5 months later, dead from a gunshot wound to the head. Throughout the 70s the murders of adolescent and teenage girls continued, all dead from a gunshot wound, all found in and around the killing fields. The fragmented police from the neighboring small towns thought the rampage to be the work of a serial killer. Suspects came forward, but the police lacked the evidence to link them to the murders. The pile of unsolved cases grew through the 80s and 90s. Some bodies were found, some women simply went missing, cars abandoned nearby, never to be seen again. The murders and mysterious disappearances continued through 2006, when suddenly an eerie quiet descended on the wasteland. In 2012, a breakthrough occurred. Then 45-year-old Kevin Edison Smith was given life without parole for the 1986 murder of 13-year-old Crystal Jean Baker. Smith was linked to the crime after he was arrested in Louisiana for an unrelated incident in 2010. A DNA test performed on Smith matched samples taken from Crystal's underwear and dress. To this day, Smith is the only conviction tied to the killing field murders, though detectives hope he may provide some key information for other cases. The history of this tormented area has been featured in the 2011 drama Texas Killing Fields, and a haunting edition of CBS's 48-Hour Mystery. The projects track the many women between the ages of 10 and 25, that have disappeared from around Galveston, Texas, and the cops striving to solve the cases before they go cold. Though the fields have remained quiet for the past 10 years, the mystery of Texas' most notorious killing spree is far from over. 6. The strange icebox murders. The icebox murders. Houston's so-called icebox murders of Fred and Edwina Rogers, an elderly couple living in Montrose, may be one of the strangest cases yet. On June 23, 1965, Edwina's nephew Marvin became concerned about the couple when his phone calls to his aunt went unanswered. Marvin asked police to check in on the couple, who complied. When police responded, they found the house locked, but forced their way in. Food had been left on the table, which somehow led to the officers checking inside the fridge. What they found, numerous cuts of washed, unwrapped meat was neatly stacked on the shelves, which the officer thought came from a butchered hog, didn't seem all that out of the ordinary. But as the officer went to shut the door, he saw the Rogers head staring back at him. They had been stashed in the vegetable crisper. That meat turned out to be the Rogers' legs and torsos. Investigators said that a claw hammer had been used to beat Fred to death, and both of his eyes had been gouged out. Police determined that Edwina had been shot in the head, and both had been hacked into pieces in the bathroom. The house was eerily devoid of blood, and appeared to have been thoroughly cleaned. Stranger still was that their sex organs had been thrown in the sewer outside of the house, and that other missing body parts were never recovered. Also, there was the 43-year-old unemployed hermit son, Charles Frederick Rogers, who apparently lived with his parents in an attic bedroom but whom neighbors didn't recall ever seeing. The only drops of blood in the house led to the son's attic room, and a bloody keyhole gave more of a hint as to what was to come, but when investigators entered, no Charles. In fact, he just disappeared, and was declared legally dead in 1975, 10 years after the murders. In 1992, the authors of the book The Man on the Grassy Knoll theorized that Charles was a CIA agent who was involved in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. According to their work, Rogers was a CIA agent who likely impersonated Lee Harvey Oswald in Mexico City and, along with Charles Harrelson, was one of two shooters involved in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. There's no telling who Charles actually was, considering he communicated with his parents only by writing notes that were slipped under the door, and didn't appear to interact with any other actual human beings ever. And, like everything else on this list, the icebox murders remain unsolved. 7. The mystery of the Austin yogurt shop murders. On December 6, 1991, 4 teenage girls were scrubbing down counters and sweeping the floors at a yogurt shop in Austin, Texas, when they were brutally attacked and shot to death. The incident would ultimately lead to court decisions that shocked the community, leaving questions unanswered and a murder mystery that still lingers more than 20 years later. Jennifer Harbison and Eliza Thomas, both 17, were working part-time at I Can't Believe It's Yogurt, a small shop situated snugly in a strip mall off of W. Anderson Lane. On the night of the murders, they were busy cleaning up the store after hours, anticipating a sleepover after their shifts ended. Jennifer's 15-year-old sister, Sarah Harbison, was sitting at one of the tables in the shop, waiting for the girls to finish work. Sarah's friend, 13-year-old Amy Ayers, sat beside her. At around midnight, firefighters responded to a fire at the yogurt shop. As they worked to distinguish the flames, one of the firefighters spotted what looked like a human foot. He rushed through the smoke and rubble to take a better look. As he drew closer, he discovered 3 girls near the back door, naked and stacked on top of each other, covered with styrofoam cups that were drenched in lighter fluid and set afire. As the firefighter looked closer, he realized the young girls were dead, lying in a mixture of blood, smoke, debris, and chocolate syrup. All 3 had been shot in the head, execution style. The youngest teen, Amy, was found a few minutes later, lying alone, barely alive, near the yogurt shop bathrooms. She died shortly after, having sustained 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Some of the girls had been raped, but it would be years before DNA testing would become available. Shannon Quaranta, a former student at Austin's Crockett High School, was a teen when the killings happened. She remembered how it shattered the illusion in the community that teens were safe while working after-school jobs. When I found out, I was shocked. She explained. Here are teens that were out working instead of being at the mall hanging out, partying or sitting around home watching TV. They were working, they were being responsible, and such a horrible tragedy took place. I think the biggest impact was that could have been me. That could have been my friends. Since the firefighters arrived first, the crime scene was contaminated. While they worked to put out the flames, a lot of the evidence was obliterated and washed away. This innocent mistake would prove to be costly in the years to come. Austin investigators worked with what they had, trying to piece together exactly what happened that night, but for over a week, they had no leads. Their first break came when a local teen, Morris Pierce, 16 at the time, was caught at nearby Northcross Mall, carrying a .22 caliber gun. When questioned, Pierce bragged that the gun was used to kill the yogurt shop girls. He said a friend, Forrest Wellborn, 15, gave him the pistol, but after police wired Pierce and listened in on a conversation between him and Wellborn, it was obvious Wellborn had no idea what Pierce was getting at. It was obvious to everyone that Pierce was trying to force the issue on Wellborn, who had no idea what Pierce was talking about, said one of the homicide detectives on the case. Wellborn was brought in for questioning afterwards, and although he passed a polygraph test, he mentioned two other teens, Michael Scott and Rob Springsteen, both 17 at the time. Wellborn said he traveled with the teens in a stolen Nissan Pathfinder just days after the murder, but with no evidence to link any of them to the crime, the case stalled. Authorities let Pierce off the hook after the ballistics with the gun he had didn't match up. Detectives noted that Pierce seemed to have a mental illness. 5 years later, despite thousands of tips pouring in, the case remained unsolved. In 1996, a new detective, Paul Johnson, took over, and while searching through numerous tips, Pierce's name stood out to him. Working off of an FBI profile for the murders, he brought in Pierce, Scott, Springsteen, and Wellborn for questioning. All of them denied any involvement in the murders at first, but after a series of intense interrogations, Scott was the first to break, and admitted that he helped carry out the murders. According to Scott, both Pierce and Springsteen brought a gun into the yogurt shop, planning to rob it, while Wellborn acted as a lookout and stayed in the car. Scott said he took a gun from Pierce at some point after Pierce began yelling at the girls for money. Scott also indicated that Springsteen hit one of the girls and sexually assaulted her. As another girl began screaming for her life, Scott said he shot her in the head at Pierce's insistence. He then remembered running out the door to the getaway car, while the yogurt shop began to catch on fire. He stated Wellborn had apparently fled the scene while they were inside. In 1999, all four men were charged with capital murder. Springsteen admitted to shooting one of the girls, but Pierce and Wellborn never admitted to the killings and were let go. The problem remained that most of the evidence had been washed away years ago by the fire department, and aside from their confessions, detectives had nothing else to go on. Regardless, prosecutors won their case based on confessions and circumstantial evidence. Springsteen was sentenced to death. Scott was sentenced to life in prison without parole. While the case should have been closed with 2 convictions, it was only the beginning. In 2006, Springsteen's sentence was reduced from death to life in prison without parole. In 2007, new testing revealed an unknown man's DNA on the youngest victim, Amy. Investigators argued that an additional person was with the suspects that night, but without DNA evidence to place Scott and Springsteen at the crime scene, they were released from prison on the condition that they could be arrested again should new evidence against them arise. Scott was released in 2007, followed by Springsteen in 2009. Their defense attorneys argued that 2 teenage boys were railroaded, bullied, and coerced into giving false confessions. Surveillance videos show detectives relentlessly questioning the boys and pressuring them with threats. One detective pulled out a gun and placed it beside one of the teens. Detectives said that Scott and Springsteen gave similar accounts to what happened without coercion, and that they also detailed things about the crime scene that only the killers would know. For instance, Springsteen knew how Amy was positioned and knew the type of gun used to kill her. Sergeant John Lara, who questioned both teens at the time, said there's no doubt in his mind that they arrested the guilty parties. Nevertheless, the DNA found didn't match any of the 4 suspects, and there was no other evidence linking them to the crime. Meanwhile, Pierce was reportedly suffering anxiety attacks stemming from the murder investigation. In 2011, he was killed in a run-in with police, after he pulled a knife out and stabbed one of the officers. Family members said Pierce hadn't been the same since the 1991 murders, and always thought the police were out to get him. In reality, he was stopped for a traffic infraction and allegedly panicked. The same year Pierce was killed, Springsteen filed a lawsuit against the state, seeking $700,000 for the wrongful conviction. While the lawsuit currently hangs in limbo, prosecutors are adamant that since Springsteen still remains a suspect in the case, the lawsuit is simply legal fiction. Detectives are still working on finding more evidence in the murders, but for now, it remains an unsolved mystery. In the meantime, the senseless killings of 4 girls persistently hangs in the air in Austin, while many locals await a conclusion that may never come. 8. The unsolved murder of Amber Hagerman. On the afternoon of January 13, 1996, Amber Hagerman, 9, and her 5-year-old brother, Ricky, pedaled their bicycles to an abandoned grocery store in Arlington, Texas. Minutes later, Ricky turned to head back home, about a block away. Jim Cavell, a 78-year-old retiree, stood in his backyard not far away. "I saw Amber riding up and down," he said later. "She was by herself. I saw this pickup." He pulled up, jumped out and grabbed her. "When she screamed, I figured the police ought to know about it, so I called them." Cavell described the truck as being dark, possibly black. The abductor was white or Hispanic. Police arrived within a minute or two. By that time, Jimmy Whitson, Amber's grandfather, was on his way to the locale of the former Winn-Dixie store to check on her. When Ricky had arrived back home without Amber, Whitson had grown worried. By the time he arrived, cops were there. Experts say that stranger abductions are rare. They are also among the most difficult cases to solve. Even with an eyewitness, investigators were stymied. They theorized that it was a crime of opportunity, that the kidnapper saw Amber alone and impulsively decided to snatch her. The vacant lot where children like to play was on East Hagerman Street, not far from a huge General Motors plant. From the beginning, cops felt that the abductor was almost certainly familiar with the area. Local police were joined by volunteers, and the FBI in the massive search that followed. A truck similar to that of the kidnapper had been spotted outside a nearby laundromat before Amber was taken, but investigators never located the vehicle. 4 days later, a man was walking his dog near the Forest Hill Apartments, just a few miles from where the child had been snatched. At the bottom of a creek bed, he saw a child's body. Amber Hagerman had been found. An autopsy determined that Amber has been held alive for 2 days. During that time she was sexually assaulted. Arlington police and the FBI formed a task force to search for the killer. Investigators followed up thousands of leads, but none turned up the murderer. By 1999, the task force had been disbanded and the case had gone cold. The killer has gone undetected now for 11 years. Arlington detective Jim Ford recently said, "There would be nothing more important or rewarding than seeing this case get resolved, because it is as bad as they get." Shortly after Amber went missing, a caller to a Dallas radio station asked a simple question: why can't law enforcement team with the media to quickly provide information to the public when a child is abducted? The idea caught on, and the Amber Alert was born. It began locally as the Dallas Amber Alert. Then it became a statewide program and finally went national. Since its formation, the Amber Alert is credited with the rescue of more than 300 missing and abducted children. Glenda Wilson, Amber's grandmother, prays that the killer will be caught. However, she's not optimistic. "Police really don't have much to go on," she said. "A few fibers they found on her body, they tell us. They're still working on it, and they call us now and then. They say they'll never give up. After 10 years, you lose hope that they'll ever find him, but I still have a little bit of hope." A psychological profile was issued by police a few weeks after the murder. Unfortunately, it was a generic rehash of profiles released after many such crimes. The killer was at least 25, cops said. He lived or worked near the scene of the crime. Since Amber was alive for 2 days after she was kidnapped, the killer had to have had some place to keep the child. Something probably caused him to snap, police said. Since 1996, a killer has roamed free. Did he keep trophies of his victims so he can relive his crime? Has he killed again? Is he free or incarcerated? Amber Hagerman deserves justice and her killer deserves a Texas send-off to hell. 9. The unsolved mystery of the Texarkana murders. Texarkana, a small town that straddles the state line between Texas and Arkansas, is also known as the town that dreaded sundown, thanks to the 1976 horror flick of the same name. Set in Texarkana and based loosely on a string of local slayings, the proto-slasher film came out just 2 years after the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Black Christmas, and 2 years before Halloween. Yet the true story behind the Texarkana Moonlight murders is as chilling as anything seen on the silver screen, and made all the more unsettling, because the case remains unsolved nearly 70 years later. The mysterious Moonlight murders rocked the sleepy southern town of Texarkana in 1946. Police on either side of the state line struggled to work as one, while the killings themselves possess the iconic quality of urban legend. Young couples parked at the end of a lonely country road, savaged after the sun went down. In fact, some claim that the infamous campfire tale of lovers, who catch a report of a hook-handed killer on the car radio only to discover a bloody hook hanging from their back door, can be traced to the Texarkana Moonlight murders. The killer, described by witnesses as wearing a white mask or sack with holes cut for eyes, was dubbed the Phantom Killer or Phantom Slayer, a name that, like so much about the case, seemed ready-made for drive-in theaters. Authorities believe he killed 5 people in 10 weeks. 3 others, including his first 2 victims, survived their attacks. The first attack took place on February 22, 1946, on a secluded road outside of town. The Phantom approached Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean Laurie, a young couple parked in their car. He blinded them with his flashlight upon approach, then held them at gunpoint and ordered them out of the vehicle. The Phantom then told Jimmy Hollis to remove his pants and proceeded to beat him severely, fracturing his skull. The Phantom told Mary Jean Laurie to run. When she scrambled toward a ditch, he told her to change course and run toward the road. He then chased her down and sexually assaulted her before letting her run away again. In spite of the savagery of their attacks, both Hollis and Laurie survived. Others were not so lucky. In March, Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Morrow were found dead in their parked car at the end of a secluded road. A few weeks later they were joined by another young boy and girl, Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker. Booker was the Phantom's youngest victim, at only 15 years old. In the first week of May, the Phantom Killer attacked what are his last official victims, a husband and wife, in their farmhouse northeast of town. Virgil Starks was killed by 2 shots to the back of the head, but his wife Katie survived, in spite of being shot twice in the face, and having to run down the street to a neighbor's house to get help. While the Phantom was on the loose, Texarkana was like a city under siege. Residents armed themselves and curfews were set for local businesses. In spite of the involvement of the Texas Rangers, no arrest was ever made in connection with the Moonlight murders. Many people believe that local man named Yarwell Swinney, arrested in 1947 for auto theft, was the Phantom. His wife confessed to as much at the time, but by law she could not testify against her husband. She later repudiated her confession. Swinney remained in prison as a habitual offender until 1973, and died in 1994, without ever implicating himself in the murders. In 2014, James Presley, a Texarkana native, wrote what he considered to be a definitive book on the murders, The Phantom Killer, Unlocking the Mystery of the Texarkana Serial Murders, the story of a town in terror. In it, he lays out enough evidence that he claims proves Swinney was responsible for all 5 Phantom slayings. Others remain unconvinced. A 1948 cold case involving the disappearance of 21-year-old Virginia Carpenter, from Texarkana is thought by some to have been the work of the Phantom Killer, though Swinney was already in prison by that time. And in 1999 and 2000 an anonymous woman contacted surviving family members of the Phantom's victims to apologize for what her father had done. But Yarwell Swinney never had a daughter. Regardless of the killer's true identity, the town he traumatized has never been the same since the spring of 1946. Yet while other towns may have tried to forget such a gruesome legacy, Texarkana embraced it. When The Town That Dreaded Sundown was filmed there in 1976, locals were cast as extras. Every year around Halloween, the movie is screened at Spring Lake Park, near where one of the murders took place. The Texarkana murders remain unsolved to this day. Whoever hid behind that white mask, Chances are that after almost 70 years he no longer lurks on the streets of Texarkana, as the tagline to the town that dreaded sundown suggests. Yet his legacy lives on, haunting the country roads of Texas and Arkansas beneath the glow of the moon. 10. The Fort Worth Missing Trio. The Fort Worth Missing Trio case involves three young ladies who went missing on December 23, 1974 from the shopping mall in Fort Worth, Texas. They've never been found. Mary Rachel Trelica, who went by Rachel, was 17 and recently married, very young. But times were different then. Her husband, Tommy Trelica, was a widower a few years older with a young son. Interestingly, Tommy had been previously engaged to Rachel's older sister, Deborah, but that had apparently ended amicably, and with no hard feelings when he and Rachel later married. I suppose I can believe that. It had to have been awkward though. On the morning of December 23, 1974, Rachel was going Christmas shopping. Her sister Deborah was actually staying with the Trelicas at this time, and Rachel asked her sister to come along, but Deborah was still in bed and declined. Along for the shopping trip was Lisa Renee Wilson, Renee, 14, a friend of Rachel's. Things were great for Renee that day. Her boyfriend, Terry, had given her a promise ring that morning, and they were supposed to attend a Christmas party together that evening. Renee asked Terry to come along shopping, but he was going to a friend's house and passed. His younger sister, Julianne Mosley, 9, begged to come along though. She was bored that day. She and her family didn't know Rachel Trelica and were reluctant to let her go, but Julie's entreaties won out. The girls headed out, stopping at the Army, Navy store, to retrieve some layaway items on the way to their destination, Seminary South Shopping Center. Rachel parked her and her husband's Oldsmobile on the upper-level parking lot by Sears, and in they went. Multiple witnesses reported seeing them at the mall that day. Renee was wearing a distinctive shirt that people remembered. Authorities believe they also returned to the car at some point. Christmas gifts were found inside, including one Rachel had purchased for her stepson. But the car was abandoned where it was parked, and the girls were never seen again. There was one final oddity. The next morning, Deborah and Tommy found a letter in the Trelicas' mailbox addressed to Thomas Trelica with Rachel scribbled in the upper left corner. The letter said, "I know I'm going to catch it, but we just had to get away. We're going to Houston. See you in about a week. The car is in Sears upper lot. Love, Rachel." The stamped postal code was blurred, so the location it was mailed from was difficult to determine with certainty. The family did not believe the handwriting was Rachel's, noting the odd way her name was written, as if done incorrectly the first time, and the formal address of Thomas used, rather than Tommy. The girls did not return. This case devastated all families involved. A private detective was later hired, but he committed suicide in 1979 and his records were destroyed. It is unknown if he discovered anything. Rusty, Rachel Trelica's brother, was young when she disappeared and became determined as an adult to find out what had happened. He later worked with a different private investigator and, for a time, they came to the conclusion that Deborah was involved in the disappearance, and that Rachel was still alive but being prevented from returning home. He believed Renee and Julie were likely deceased. His reasons for coming to these conclusions are unclear, but apparently convincing enough. He and family members of the other missing girls posted an open letter to Deborah in January 2000 stating that if she had nothing to hide, she should cooperate with the investigation and take a polygraph. I am not sure of Deborah's response. A website, missingtrio.com, was created by Rusty to publicize the case, and includes this open letter and other information. However, the website had not been updated in many years. After the disappearance was publicized, a few witnesses came forward to report seeing a girl or several girls being hustled into a truck, or van, in the parking lot, but none were verified, and that was about the extent of it. Many years later in 2001, a witness came forward to report seeing the girls with a young security guard in the mall parking lot around 11:30 the evening of their disappearance, and that the girls seemed relaxed. The accuracy of this is also unknown. So what happened? I was fascinated by this case when I first learned of it, and read about it extensively online. I believe runaway can be ruled out. Julie was young and it was 2 days before Christmas, so I can't see her wanting to go anywhere. Renee was excited about her relationship and had just taken a big step forward in it. And if for any reason Rachel wanted to run away, why would she allow a 9-year-old to come along that day? For a long time, I thought that maybe something happened accidentally with Julie that day and the older girls panicked and ran away. But it's hard to believe that Rachel and Renee would never make any contact with their family as the years went on. Also, for this to have happened, that's 2 separate incidents happening as opposed to one, with no real witnesses or information surfacing as to either, which is pretty unlikely. Especially during the daytime, in a busy area, around Christmas. Web Sleuths has an extensive thread on this case, which is time-consuming to go through, but does offer some noteworthy insights. For one, Deborah posted there for a time. She firmly denied Rusty's allegations and was open to answering questions from posters. There were many more recent posts from someone who claimed to have contacts in both law enforcement on this case and to Rusty, and described what they understood to be the most likely scenario. This theory identified a man named Mike DeBartolome as the culprit. DeBartolome was a convicted kidnapper, rapist, counterfeiter, and suspected serial killer who was in the habit of passing counterfeit bills in shopping malls. After his arrest for counterfeiting, he was found to have committed much more serious sex crimes. He was operating around Texas in the time, and was also known to impersonate security guards and other positions of authority. The poster wrote that he had convinced Rusty of the legitimacy of this theory and convinced him that Deborah was likely not involved. The official opinion from law enforcement currently is that the girls left the mall willingly with someone they trusted and were later harmed. In recent years, I've wavered between the law enforcement theory and the Mike DeBartolome one. Both have merit. I think we can determine the following for sure: the girls left the mall willingly and or reasonably quietly. Whether the culprit was one person or multiple, it would still be mighty difficult to abduct 3 people without anyone noticing, especially from a mall at Christmas time. So either the girls left willingly with someone they knew or felt comfortable leaving with, someone impersonating a security guard or policeman, or the abductor was intimidating enough that they didn't make a huge scene, again, a security guard or policeman. Someone with a gun? There were a couple of witnesses who came forward on seeing something in the parking lot, but really not a lot. The girls weren't planning to run away. I think the inclusion of Julie backs up this point, as well as the time frame of 2 days before Christmas. Even if anyone was planning to run away, I can't think of any teenager not waiting around for their presents first. One factor that might lean towards the Mike DeBartolome theory is the lack of any information in later years on the fate of the girls. If it was someone they knew, that means it was someone local, and people talk. There has been a lot of reward money offered over the years for information in this case. In contrast, DeBartolome drifted around to commit his crimes and was notoriously tight-lipped and secretive. Once imprisoned, he was questioned extensively on possible rape, murder crimes. A bunch of photos were found after his arrest for counterfeiting. A telling quote from the Wikipedia article on him: "He earned the respect of FBI profilers because he never gave himself away in unguarded moments, nor bragged about his exploits."